Hi, my name is Charles Gary. I'm CEO and co-founder of DataDistillr. Today, I'm going to give you a quick overview of what we're all about and a quick demo. I've just a bit about me. I've worked as a data scientist in cyber for about 15 years. I've taught at Black Hat many times. I started my career in the intelligence community, and then I worked for two major banks, Deutsche and JP Morgan, doing kind of cyber data science stuff, both in kind of practitioners and in management. Now, I, in the course of my career, I kept seeing the same problems over and over again in the data world, and that's what ultimately led me to launch DataDistillr. We launched our tool. We launched the company in about October of 2020 with me and some of my former colleagues from the NSA. We're backed by two prominent VCs, Foundation Capital and Bessemer, and it's built upon an open source query engine called Apache Drill, which more about that later. And I've co-authored a book about that, and I'm the project management committee chair for the Apache Foundation for this particular project. Now, the problem that I kept seeing over and over again in the data world, and particularly in cyber, is that data is everywhere. If you are doing any kind of meaningful data analysis especially in security, you may be dealing with Splunk, you may be dealing with Elasticsearch, you may have log files places or PCAP, you may be pulling stuff, it's all over the place. You may be pulling stuff from SaaS platforms, and there's no easy way to simply get the data in one place so that you can actually work with it. And what I kept seeing over and over again was that companies are really struggling with this. The implication is that if you can't get all your data to one place where you can work, where a security analyst can work with it, it's very difficult for them to actually tell an end-to-end story because your data is not in one place. And so I would argue that this is ultimately driving up risk, and it's making it harder for companies to secure themselves. Now, the industry kind of peddles this idea that the solution is to put all your data in one place and then everything will be right in the world. Having managed Splunk installations at two major banks, I can tell you my point of view on this is that it's a practical impossibility to move all of your data into one platform. And I say this just because I've witnessed it, but don't take my word for it. One of the most popular analytics platforms out there is Snowflake, and at Snowflake's most recent conference, there was a survey done, and they found that 86% of their customers have less than half of their data in Snowflake. From a security perspective, from an analyst perspective, what that means is that I can't work with half of the data that I may need. And so the big question there is, well, what about the other half? What if the important things are in that? What do you do about it? I know from my experience, I think this was at JP Morgan, we didn't have, we're Splunk users. We didn't just have one Splunk, we had 50 Splunks. And it was almost impossible for a user to know what data was in which Splunk. And even if you knew what data it was, what happens if you had data in Splunk A and that you needed to join with Splunk B to do some sort of analysis? It became as the organizations grow, it just becomes it becomes very difficult. And so what I kept hearing was, we want a single pane of glass. We want a single place where we can go and work with all of our data. You hear so many people in cyber use that phrase. And so what DataDistillr is about is it's an endeavor to actually give analysts what they want and give them that single pane of glass. Now, this is not just a convenience. This is a real need. The implications of this are that analysts can actually work with all of their data from one place. They don't have to spend all kinds of time pulling data and moving it around and doing all this kinds of stuff. From a company's perspective, it also means you can save tons of money on data engineering time. And So in other words, you don't have to move all your data into multiple Splunks so that they can work with it. You can leave it where it is, and DataDistillr can query that data where it is, and you don't have to copy your data and now worry about maintaining a data pipeline and all this kind of stuff. You just query the data where it is, and you connect to it with DataDistillr, and that problem is largely solved. So our value proposition is that we can, instead of having to move the data into a central location where you can query it, you leave the data where it is, and our tool connects to that data and queries it directly. Thus, the user, what they experience is a kind of black box. You connect the data, you put a query into our black box, and you get data back. And it doesn't really matter where that data is coming from, if it's coming from Splunk or Elasticsearch or a collection of PCAPs in a shared drive, it doesn't matter. They can just query their data and work with it without having to do all that stuff. Our tool does some other things that are really nice. So it does automatic schema discovery so that you can just kind of work with this data without having to think about like, oh, it's in this, it's an XML format, or it's in this format or that format. You can just query the data without any kind of preparation or cleanup or any of that kind of stuff. Now, obviously you will have to do cleanup. There's, the data is never clean. So all that kind of stuff, there is that, but you don't have to do any kind of preparation to get your data into our tool. You just connect it and that's it. Our tool can connect to a really wide array of different data types as well. So we're not just talking about things like databases and Splunk. We can connect to file systems. We can connect to SaaS platforms like ServiceNow or Salesforce or ClickUp and Jira, things like that. We can pretty much connect to just about any kind of data that you have. And once you connecting to the data isn't enough, so our tool allows you to join these disparate data sources together, and you can merge them and create interactive dashboards, and also ultimately publish this data and share findings with your team, of course, without compromising security and governance. So with that, and really the bottom line here is that you get direct access to all of your data, not just 50%. That's not good enough. Not 25%, all of it. And with that, I'd like to show a brief demo of what we've got here. So let's pull up the screen, my screen share. Okay, so I'm going to do a brief demo of our tool, and here we go. Now, our tool should look pretty familiar to anybody who's kind of looked at other data tools. And the big difference, though, is how we actually access data. Now, our tool is organized around this idea of a project. And so the workflow that we envision is users create projects, they then connect data to the project, and then they can add other users to that project, and then everybody can kind of see what they're doing and they can collaborate that way. So this project, we've already added a Splunk and some files, but just to show you how this process works, I can click here. You can see these are the different databases that we can connect to. Now, all of these, we can connect to kind of your traditional relational databases, but we can also connect to things like Splunk, Elasticsearch, and so forth. And the user experience that you get from working these is exactly the same. Of course, you can just simply upload files from your desktop if you want to, or you can connect to cloud storage buckets, S3, Dropbox, things like that. You can also connect to various APIs and SaaS platforms, so things like Salesforce, ServiceNow. You can query all this kind of data directly from our tool, and it's really straightforward. You can see, like for ClickUp, all we have to do is put an API token, and we have documentation as to how exactly you get that, and then we have some custom endpoints and so forth. So once you've linked data to the project, it's actually really easy to start using it. Now, here we have this Splunk instance. You can see here, these are all the indexes that are present, that I have access to, I should say. I can then click here and you can see this index, and these are all the columns that are present. And so if I click query, this is what you see. And it looks like data. It's just it's a data table. And so you don't have to learn Splunk's kind of goofy query language in order to actually access this. This is just standard SQL, and you can do that. Now, if you don't know SQL, we do have some builders where, and this is kind of a work in progress, but you can build filters, you can add and remove columns without having to do that. And we're kind of slowly adding more and more functionality so that users don't really have to know as much SQL. Now, that's just how you might work with Splunk. But you can also, like this query here, this is summarizing some Hadoop logs. Now, what's really neat here is we can take this and we can visualize this data directly in our tool. We can also add this to dashboards, more on that later. Now, this query here, what I'm showing you here is a PCAP. What's interesting about this, though, is it's not just showing you the raw packets. It's actually summarizing this and rolling it up. See all of the everything that was sent in either direction, and you can run full-on SQL against this as it is here. Now, when you load PCAP files into our tool will automatically discover, you know, all the schemas for this. You can see these are all the fields that are available, and it feels, all of this data feels exactly the same. So in this case, like down here, we have a JSON file. You can see this is what's here. We can drill down into the nested structures, and you can see all the fields that are available in that file. And all of this ultimately should feel the same. Now, this is kind of another just example of how DataDistillr really can help a user. In this case, we have this other PCAP file. Now, what we might want to do is we might want to see, like, let's say you just didn't know what the different services were for each ports. This query is actually, we have a lot of enrichment functionality built in our tool. So here, what we're doing is we're getting the service name for the port numbers, and we can actually click over here and do this, and then we can see, oh, okay, these are how many times all of these values appear in this column. Or we could do a select distinct, and then we can summarize this and get a nice little summary. This is directly from the file. And it's, again, this is querying the raw data. There's no transformations necessary. It's all this there. Now, once you get your data to a state where you're happy with it, you can actually create an API endpoint and publish this data. And once you do that, we generate Python and R code. So you can just cut and paste this into a Python script, and then you can do more advanced, like machine learning or something like that with the data. And last but not least, I know you're wondering, yes, we do have dark mode. In summary, DataDistillr lets you access all of your data quickly and easily so that you can get value from your data without having to set up all kinds of data pipelines and do any of that kind of stuff. I hope that you've enjoyed this brief presentation and will consider us for presenting at Black Hat. Thank you very much, and have a good day.